Norbert's Dream. Once upon a time, there was a little toad named Norbert, or at least that's what he thought. He lived alone in a dark and humid place. However, he did not remember how he got there. As far as he could remember, he had always lived there. And as he hadn't seen any other toad for so long, if ever, he didn't use his name anymore, and it started to fade from his memory. His little world was quite small indeed. It was surrounded by high walls, one of which had a small opening at the very top. The ground was humid and muddy, and in a corner there was a large dark hole. Norbert didn't like that hole very much, because things that fell into it never came back. It was a hole that swallowed all things, and Norbert preferred to stay away from it. He lived comfortably in his little dark world, eating insects and spending his day keeping himself busy in whatever way he could. But at night, Norbert always had strange dreams. He dreamed of light and colors, green mostly, or so he thought. When he woke up, he was confused and didn't remember his dream very well. They were blurry, but he could feel something luminous inside of him, something forgotten. Light was rather scarce where he lived. In the morning, only a few sun rays would come in from the opening at the top of the wall and would light up a little piece of his house. After waking up, he would enjoy the little sunshine, gently warming him up and chasing away the cold from the night. Seated in this little patch of sun, he would see tiny flies dancing in the light and would turn them into a lovely breakfast. After that, he would sometimes wander around his tiny world, looking at the earth, studying its texture. Sometimes, when it was raining, a waterfall would form from the opening at the top of the wall and would run all the way down the hole that swallows all things. The earth would become muddier, and Norbert loved mud. He would bathe in it, covering himself entirely with this cool and soft mud. But before the end of the rain, he would rinse himself under the waterfall and go back to observe the ground or bit of clouds that he could see passing by the opening at the top of the wall when he was standing right against the opposite wall. He had never tried to go out through the opening at the top of the wall, mainly because it was way too high, but also because he was used to his little world. It was his. In his memory, it was the only place there was. But in his dreams, however, there was something else. Was it another place? Was it his imagination? Or a distant memory now buried deep? Norbert loved rainy days, because sometimes new things would appear in his tiny world, which would pleasantly disturb his daily routine. Sometimes rain would bring some leaves, sometimes all scrunched, other times all punctured or floppy. And the little toad would examine them with care, looking at their texture, their color, their shape. He would find there a whole new world. Occasionally, rain would bring other objects that he couldn't identify, with smooth textures, sometimes shiny or colored. Norbert always examined closely every new thing coming into his world before it disappeared into the hole that swallows all things. When it was not raining, Norbert would stay entertained by listening to the sounds, smelling the air that came in through the opening at the top of the wall. Some smells and sounds would appear with some regularity. He knew them so well he could even anticipate them. Other smells and sounds came and went without order. He liked to stand silently, his eyes closed, and listen to all those variations on top of the regular backdrop. And so Norbert lived his quiet life, given rhythm by sounds, smells, and rains. However, he couldn't help but wonder about those strange dreams he had, so different than everything he saw while awake. One day, like any other day, Norbert was busy studying a piece of gravel half buried in the ground when it started raining. The little toad hurried to cover himself in mud and then rinsed himself under the waterfall coming from the opening at the top of the wall. Then the rain got stronger. He started to watch all the things that entered and slowly passed in front of him before disappearing in the hole that swallows all things. All sorts of things were coming in, and Norbert stood there a long time, absorbed by this train of novelties. But as the rain kept going, he stepped away from the center of the stream that formed between the opening and the hole, which was carrying everything that came in faster and faster. Soon the little toad couldn't even distinguish the thing passing by carried by the rain. He backed up to a corner, sheltered from the current. Everything had gone dark. It was likely night time. There, soothed by the sound of the rain, the stream, and in the obscurity, Norbert closed his eyes and started to doze off. And before long, he was fast asleep. While he was asleep, he started to dream, but instead of his usual dreams, he had agitated dreams, dreams of movement, of journeys, as if he was on a boat. So much so that he woke up suddenly to realize that not only had the rain not stopped, but he was now neck deep in the water and starting to float off the ground. He started to worry because the stream from the opening to the hole that swallows all things had turned into a torrent, spreading almost all the width of his little world. He was scared of being swept away and thrown into the hole that swallows all things. But the rain got even stronger, and the hole couldn't swallow all the water coming in, and little by little the current was decreasing, but the water level was rising. Norbert started to swim against the current to avoid being crushed against the back wall, and maybe even swallowed by the hole, although right now it wasn't quite swallowing all things. The little toad was tiring quickly. He had never swum in his little world. Fortunately, like every toad, he knew how to swim well. But the water kept rising and Norbert kept swimming and tiring. His legs started to hurt, his movements became messy, he struggled more not to lose ground and he started to despair. Just as he was about to give up and let himself slide away, the water almost reached the top of the wall, and suddenly the current switched direction and the water started to come out through the opening at the top of the wall. Pushed by the current, Norbert landed in a huge space. He couldn't see any limit, and light was coming from every direction. He looked around astounded. He didn't know whether the sun was rising or whether it was just the clouds moving, but he was there, blinking and trying to make sense of what he saw. He had managed to regain his footing as it was rushed out and could now catch his breath as well. Around him, everything was still. There was only the movement of the wind on the water that covered almost everything. The rain had become a light drizzle. He stayed there a moment, listening to the singing wind and the sound of the minuscule droplets gently landing on the wet ground. Before long, the rain stopped. The clouds kept moving, and Norbert started jumping. Each landing resulted in a little explosion of water, sending cheerful droplets in the air, and Norbert felt happy. Looking up, he saw in the distance, under the clouds slowly passing by, a long green stretch, so different from the hardened black ground on which he had landed, coming out of this little world. It was the same rain he had seen in his dreams. He decided to get closer. Maybe he would find answers to all the questions he had about his strange dreams. Splashing and splotching, he covered the distance separating him from the lovely bright green. Grass, that's what it was. All of a sudden he had remembered. He had seen grass before, he was sure of it. He started to move forward through the blades of grass. It was cool and soft and springy and so delightful that Norbert felt like laughing. It was exactly like in his dreams. Maybe I am asleep, he thought. Maybe this is what I dream every night. Maybe this time when I wake up I will remember everything. Then, as he was walking without knowing where and was starting to feel hungry, he thought to himself that he should probably wake up so he could have his breakfast. And so he tried to wake up. He closed his eyes, focused, and opened them up. But nothing was different. He was still in the grass, with the wind carrying the smell of wet earth. He closed his eyes again, focused harder, and opened them. But he was still in the same place. After a few more failed attempts, he had to face it. He wasn't dreaming. This place actually existed. And if this place seemed familiar, as he had dreamt of it, then maybe it was a memory. Maybe he knew this place, and he had simply forgotten about it. And if he had already been there, maybe this is precisely where he came from. Norbert was excited that he might have found the place he came from, that he might have found the place he knew long ago and that he had forgotten for so long. And he could start finally to find the answers to all the questions he had about his dreams. But despite the familiar feeling, he didn't exactly know where he was. He felt a bit lost, so he stopped to look around. He could see trees further away, and above the trees, clouds. And between the clouds, he saw a massive bright ball, the sun. He felt its warmth on his back, and around him everything started to sparkle. Each and every droplet of water reflected the sun rays in as many tiny lights. Norbert was in awe. He saw the sun shine on the top of a tree that was a bit taller than all the other trees. This tree, I know it, he thought suddenly. He rushed toward the tree, sometime walking, sometime jumping to check that he was still going in the right direction. As he got closer, the ground became more and more humid and began to turn into mud. It was not the same mud as where he lived. It was softer, less dark. He started burying his feet in it and taking them out, sliding and turning and swirling around, losing all notion of space, until, splash! He had stepped out of the grass and was now in a pond. His pond. This is where he came from. Everything was coming back to him now. The tree, the pond, his home. And one night where, when walking in the grass, he got caught in a storm, got lost and swept away by the wind and the rain, had almost drowned, and ended waking up in the small, humid, dark place where he had lived ever since, so long ago that he ended up forgetting. He was so happy to be in the pond. He could swim, get out for a mud bath, and then swim again, go for another mud bath. As he was taking yet another mud bath, he heard voices nearby, as if other toads were talking. Maybe he had a family, maybe he had friends. He got closer to the voice and found himself in front of several toads that were looking at him inquisitively. It was a long time since they had seen a newcomer. But all at once, their faces lit up. They recognized him. It was Albert, his little brother, his parents, and all his friends. They were all very moved. They thought that the night of the storm they had lost him forever. They started to talk all at once, telling Norbert about everything that had happened since he disappeared, while asking him where he had been and what he had done all this time, only pausing to eat enthusiastically any insects that had the bad luck to pass by. They stayed chatting for a long while, happy, celebrating the return of Norbert. Norbert was happy. Now he knew what he had been dreaming about every night. He remembered. He was back. He was home. At night, when the sun set, he fell asleep peacefully next to his family, soothed by the sound of the water, of the wind in the grass and the trees, and the smell of the flowers. He felt good. He doesn't remember if he dreamed that night, but he didn't really need to dream because he was finally back home.